Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and tonight we have with us Dr. Adamson. Dr. Adamson, welcome. Dr. Adamson has joined our group in Macon, Georgia, doing neurosurgery, and is a gentleman of great repute and virtues. And he comes to us from Johns Hopkins, from Duke, and Emory, and now he's with us. And welcome, Corey. Welcome. And he's had a lot of experience dealing with the VA and VA patients and trying to look after our nation's veterans. And I'll just throw you the football, Corey. Well, how long you were in Atlanta in the VA there? Had you been in VAs elsewhere?
Well, first of all, Dr. Robinson, I appreciate the opportunity to be introduced to your audience, and eager to talk about my VA experience. That's something that I have always been very passionate about.
Yes.
And it probably starts with the fact that my dad was a veteran.
Oh, really?
He served extensively throughout the Korean War.
Well, that was a pretty rough war. It's
rough.
Been called the Forgotten War, but certainly it was quite a terrible experience for anyone that was there. Yes.
And he got all his health care pretty much through the VA system.
Yes.
Now that was many years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was young.
Yes.
But lots of stories about his experience in the military and lots of trips to the VA.
Yeah, yes, and he was part of
care.
certainly my experience with the VA has been that particularly in World War II, the veterans, that there's quite a difference, I would say, between my experience. World War II veterans, Korean War veterans, and then later veterans, but certainly they had the right stuff, I would say. It was quite a privilege to deal with them. And so your father had a good experience with the VA and made use of their services.
He did, very much so. He had his own set of medical issues, and he needed to use the VA system, and he got good care through that system. My real experience, though, with the VA started during my neurosurgery training program at Duke.
Yes.
We had lots of clinical rotations at different sites, but by far the biggest, most extensive, most exciting rotation was at our VA, at the Durham VA, just across the street from Duke. And that's where I really got introduced to delivering health care to veterans.
Yes.
And that experience stuck with me during my training. Some of my best mentors in neurosurgery were those that I met at the VA.
Yes.
People doing great things in the operating room.
Yes.
Teaching lots of great things and doing tremendous research.
Yes.
So I saw all those things going on, and I realized that I wanted to make that a part of my career as well.
Yes. Yes.
So as soon as I finished up my training there, I was fortunate enough to stay on staff there at Duke. And one of my first requests was I wanted to keep one foot in the VA system.
Yes.
And so I started to develop my career at Duke neurosurgery, but also at the Durham VA there.
Yes.
And so throughout my entire career, I've always kept one foot in the VA system. I've always gotten a lot of joy out of that part of my career.
And I was remembering my experiences in the VA, and I think almost everyone has had some experience with that. Any physicians in the country, there's a tremendous training apparatus, and I think it was put there after World War II. Is that when that happened?
I think so.
And these hospitals were established all over the country, and often with university affiliations. And I think that was sort of a linchpin of the whole VA idea. And it serves just really hundreds of thousands of people, of different modalities and types. And so you were there, and you recollect any particularly interesting research projects you were involved in? Did he come to mind from those days and your experience there?
Well, when I started my career and started my research interest, my primary area of research was in malignant brain tumors.
Yes.
So I was able to start my basic science research stuff in malignant gliomas with a lab at the VA as well as at Duke. But my VA experience in research was also incredibly positive.
Yes.
You know, the VA system is the largest integrated healthcare system in our country.
Yes.
And it's not just about delivering healthcare to veterans. It also has an enormous mission in research and education. You know, the VA system teaches more students, more trainees than any other single healthcare system in the country. And my guess is the research dollars that go through the VA system and its scientists are probably much larger than any other single medical healthcare system in the country. So there's an enormous environment for doing research in the VA system. They have some priorities, but they're also very eager to help people develop their own research interests. So even though malignant gliomas are rare for all folks, they're not any more common in veterans than the civilian population. Even though they're rare in general, I was able to still flourish and pursue my research interest.
Now, recollecting I think actually Duke is a huge center, if I know a small amount about it, but for people with these malignant gliomas. I think Teddy Kennedy went there, so many people of great repute who have this deadly, terrible disease have made the journey there. And presumably there's what were you looking for when you, in your lab and in this, I would call it a center for glioblastoma interest?
Yeah, I've always thought that the key to understanding these very infiltrative malignant tumors is to understand their basic genomic makeup and their molecular biology.
Yes.
So that's always been the part of understanding, researching these tumors that I've always been drawn to and have focused on. So my work initially began by looking at the genomic landscape of those tumors, trying to understand what sort of mutations were going on in those tumors that were triggering those tumors to develop and progress, and then trying to understand the biology of those mutations and what sort of molecular defects go on inside those tumor cells that we could try to take advantage of for developing therapeutics. I think as a neurosurgeon, you certainly appreciate that we're very limited in what we can do for malignant gliomas.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
we can go in and resect 99% of that tumor.
Yes.
If we're that good, we can do that. But at best, their ultimate survival is still measured in months, maybe a few years. And it's because of those cells that have migrated away from where we can take them out with surgery. So that's kind of an area of the tumor phenotype that has always been interesting to me. If we could understand how to target the biology between those cells that migrate through the brain, then maybe we could come up with some way to come up with some therapeutics that maybe could be an adjunct to what we do in surgery.
And there must be 6 or 8 or 10 different strategies that have been employed, mostly unsuccessfully, to deal with this terrible problem. I mean, any comments about anything that looks promising, or we try and, in our coarse way, remove as much as we can, but I think the problem that defeats us, these little cells migrate, these deadly carriers of, I guess you'd say, end of life. They go all over the brain, and we just can't get a tumor margin. And there are different tricks out there, and I don't know anything particularly promising. I guess every year or two, some new ideas appear. And any comments about any of the work?
Lots of people are tackling it from different directions, using things like nanoparticles that could be delivered with viral vectors and other types of small molecules, small cell transport vehicles to deliver agents throughout the brain. So that has a long history, lots of exciting work still going on. Lots of development of using viruses that can easily penetrate through the brain to try to deliver things to these bad tumor cells. I I think more recently, a lot more exciting data is coming on board trying to understand how we can take advantage of our own immune system to tackle these tumor cells. So, of course, we know that our immune system has special capabilities to go after cancer cells.
Yes.
But in the setting of malignant gliomas, our immune system is dampened and defective and doesn't do a good job at taking care of these tumor cells inside the brain.
And the brain is a very special, I guess you could say, sanctum in that the blood-brain barrier protects it. And so there are different ways the blood-brain barrier can be opened and is opened with glioblastomas. There are different kinds of blood vessels there, and they sometimes allow different kinds of treatments to arrive there. Now, let me ask you this. It's been said that, or at least I'll ask your opinion about it. Do glioblastomas arise from less primitive neuronal tumors? Or is there something that just suddenly lightning strikes? Or do you have any thoughts about that? And for the audience, we sometimes have issues with less invasive tumors, not as bad, and then these high-grade gliomas are really quite deadly, and sometimes we see the less malignant tumors earlier on, and the question would be, do these bad tumors arise from the less malignant ones? Any comments?
Yeah, I think there's still a debate out there. We ought to know the answer to that question, but I think there's still a debate exactly which type of cell gives rise to the tumor cells, and is it possible that a more benign, lower grade form of that type of tumor exists first? Well, I think we have enough evidence to say that that sometimes, yes, the lower grade benign tumors certainly can go through some sorts of mutational changes that make them transform into more aggressive malignant tumors. So we see that in some patients, but that's a very small number of patients.
Yeah. Yes.
So clearly, these malignant gliomas kind of develop spontaneously without any sort of precursor type of lesion. Now, the type of cell that gives rise to that malignant tumor is also, I think, still debatable. Is it some type of stem cell in our brain that is constantly turning into various cells and then goes awry and turns into a tumor cell? Or is it a normal glial cell that has just been going through its usual mutations, and then suddenly something happens and that normal cell turns into a tumor cell? My gut feeling is that it's probably not from stem cells. It's probably from normal cells in your brain, primarily the astrocytes that make up the sort of the protective cells around our neurons. My gut feeling is those normal cells are undergoing routine changes in their genome, and for whatever reason, one of those mutations gets out of control, and that starts the process.
Now, there are all kinds of variables involved in trying to understand this terrible disease, but what about heredity? We talked, let's see, were the veterans exposed to Agent Orange? I mean, is there ways that different kinds of, I guess, untoward environmental events can influence this, or do you have any comments? I'm sure, I wouldn't be surprised to say that there was some interest in the etiology of these tumors and Vietnam and Agent Orange. Any comments on that?
Well, one reason that I was also interested in keeping one foot in the VA system and particularly pursuing research in the VA system is with glioblastomas, these malignant gliomas.
Yes.
You know, if you look at our civilian population, their median survival is on the order of 1.5 years if they're able to navigate the very complex treatments.
Right.
In the VA system, veterans, their median survival with that malignant tumor is literally half.
Yes.
Literally half. Now, it's not because the tumors are different. The tumors are not different. When you look at them at the genomic level or the molecular level or under a microscope, they're the same. And I don't think there's any overwhelming evidence that there's certain environmental exposures that makes it different for veterans, such as Agent Orange. We've known about that long enough, and we've had enough studies looking at it to say that clearly that is not a driving factor for malignant tumors in veterans. Now, could some exposure have triggered the development of a brain tumor in some veterans? Probably so, but probably not the majority.
Yeah. Now,
but those veterans do worse with those tumors, and so we need neurosurgeons who are willing to help them, as well as all the other clinicians that are needed to take care of those tumors and the other diseases.
Now, we mentioned life expectancy, et cetera, and the VAs, patients might not do as well. But as a major point about this is how soon the tumors are discovered. And is that the trick to doing better with this disease? Maybe you need scans every, whatever it is, I don't know, once a year. Are there other markers that might be available to have an earlier diagnosis? And that, I would think that would be a crucial point. Additionally, the older patients, are the tumors are slower in progression, or any comments on those thoughts?
I think the idea of surveillance imaging is a reasonable idea. You know, we run into the problem as, is it economically feasible to do head CTs on every person every year? That is quite debatable.
Yes.
But if you think about if you could catch a malignant glioma extremely early, you know, and then start therapy, you could potentially, I would say, extend their survival much longer. So then you start talking about the quality of life that you can extend, the potential that that individual can continue to contribute to society economically in other ways. So could you make an argument for surveillance imaging?
Yes.
Probably not for malignant gliomas because they're kind of rare, but if you look at all brain tumors collectively, it's a reasonable question.
Now,
you know, head CTs are becoming
less expensive,
cheaper.
Yes.
Not uncommon to drive through a major city and see an 18-wheeler parked in the parking lot of some medical center doing head CTs.
Right.
So there's mobile units out there that we could send across the country.
So really, early diagnosis would be a big thing. Prevention, whatever that is, would be a big thing. And then the question would be actually a cancer marker as far as that goes. I mean, we mentioned the immune system. I don't know, is there some way that we could pick some kind of change going on as the body responds to this unwelcome visitor? And along those lines, is there any relationship between the malignant events that take place with cancer elsewhere in the body? Particularly, I'm thinking of pancreatic cancer. So is there any similarity between the real bad, these terrible cells that turn up in glioblastomas and the terrible cells that turn up elsewhere? Or I guess I'm just throwing that out there. Is there anything we could do that's on the horizon to make things better?
Yeah, I think if there was a quick, easy, cheap test that we could do to look for markers of malignant brain tumors and other brain tumors, would be extraordinary. So there's a huge field of medicine out there, you know, trying to pursue that. So people have looked at lots of CSF markers, you know, various proteins, lots of serum markers in your blood to see if we can pick up on the presence of a tumor. There's some data out there to suggest that, but it hasn't become standard of care. So more work needs to be done. But my guess is once we study enough of it, we probably will be able to find, for example, maybe an early tumor protein that has broken off of the tumor cell and somehow made its way out of the brain into our bloodstream. I mean, that's quite feasible because the blood-brain barrier is not completely intact inside these malignant tumors.
No, they leak.
So it's quite easy.
So capillaries are different there, right? Their tight junctions, if I can remember that, aren't too good there in these glioblastomas.
That's right, yeah.
Now, let me change the thrust of our discussion slightly. And there are many, many veterans in this part of the world, and occasionally things appear about, well, the bureaucracy has problems or whatever. What are your comments in general about the view that veterans have of the VA and any administrative problems that exist? Are they being funded well enough? Is there enough money going into the system to make it work? I'll ask those questions.
I think you have to step back and think about the ultimate mission first, and that is to basically be able to provide universal health care for veterans.
Yes.
When I started my career, I really didn't understand veteran health care, so I probably didn't have much of a comment on that sort of question. But now that I've experienced it for many years, I strongly believe the country's doing the right thing by providing the health care, because the veterans who use the VA system, now not all use the VA system, I think it's about 9 million veterans, which is about half of our veteran population, I think, actually use the VA system. But many, maybe most of those folks who use that VA system, they need it.
Yes.
They don't have other resources to get health care elsewhere.
Yes.
So there is clearly this part of our population that needs that health care. Of course, we could make that same argument for
any groups,
segments of our civilian population. But yes, in the veteran population, we need it. So I believe in the country and the government's role in trying to provide that health care to veterans.
Yes.
So the mission is appropriate. And then, also have to think about the scope of this. So again, we're talking about the largest healthcare system in the country. We're talking about almost a couple hundred major healthcare systems, major medical centers.
Yes.
For example, like the Atlanta VA healthcare system in Atlanta. There are thousands of outpatient clinics and other facilities. And we're delivering healthcare to 9 million people. So enormous enterprise. It goes without saying that there's probably some limitations.
Yes.
There's only so much money to deliver healthcare on such a massive scale.
Yes.
Could more money be put into the system to make things better? Well, sure. Are they succeeding? I would say yes. I think in general, the VA system prides itself on having a strong focus on primary care for veterans, which I would argue is probably the most important thing. So that aspect of healthcare, I think, is very robust. Resources are probably a bit more limited when we're trying to provide much more costly subspecialty care like neurosurgery.
Yes.
It costs a lot of money to deliver complex neurosurgical care.
Yes.
So that's difficult for such a huge system, and that's understandable. Obviously, I believe we need to provide that high-level, technologically sophisticated, expensive subspecialty care to veterans, just as we do for our civilian population. So could more money be put into the system to make it better? Absolutely.
Is there a problem with, I don't know, a veteran that comes in that may have some special issue or special problem, and they need to go outside the VA system? Is that a doable thing? Are you able to do that? Is there a minimum paperwork to get that accomplished, or have any thoughts along those lines? In other words, how well is the system integrated into the general American healthcare dynamics? Any thought about that?
There's a well-established program in the VA system for doing that. They call it community care, but there have been other names for it over the years. Many people probably will remember the CHOICE program, so that's the same thing. And so yes, there is a well-established mechanism if a veteran needs health care outside the VA system because it's not available in the VA system. The VA most definitely covers it. if you have an emergency and you go to your local civilian ER,
yes,
and you get your health care through the VA system, of course the VA recognizes that needs to be covered. So there is a good system. Now, does it always work? No. And we also have to remember, many folks who are using this system have other limitations,
yes,
financial limitations.
Yes.
So the ability to drive to the next town to get some different type of care that's not in that particular VA hospital might be difficult for that veteran. So that part of it, I think, is a challenge. Could the VA system enhance that ability to get that veteran to those other places? I think more work could be done along those lines. We don't really do that for our civilian population.
Yes,
if your primary care doctor sees you and you have a brain tumor, he might have a list of folks he would recommend,
yes,
but it's kind of your responsibility
yes,
to go
yes,
pick up the phone,
yes,
make that appointment, gather up your medical data, like your brain MRI, and deliver it to that civilian neurosurgeon. And we more or less put that same responsibility on our veterans, and sometimes that can be a lot for that population.
And I think if I can understand this correctly, who is eligible for VA care? I mean, who gets it? If you just honorably served, is that enough? Do you have to have 20 years? I mean, who are injured in the military? Who is it that is eligible? I'm sure that's quite a law book full of regulations on that. But
and I will admit that's a bit out of my wheelhouse. But my understanding is, any active service is probably the most important thing.
Any active service.
Yeah.
And really, so it's a tremendous financial advantage to be in the military, to have this benefit when you need it after you've left your military experience. That's a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's a terrific benefit.
Now, how well does the VA just monitor care? I mean, is there an inspector general? Do people come through? And occasionally, lurid stories appear on the press about one thing or another, but presumably there's a system in place to protect the veterans and their care apparatus. Is that a pretty good system? How does that work?
And you're right. Unfortunately, we pay attention to the bad stories that might pop up, just like we do in the civilian communities. The VA system has its own mechanism of doing peer reviews of the health care that's being delivered. It pretty much exactly mirrors what happens outside of the VA system. They have their own internal legal department to help when that is needed, and they have their own mechanism for monitoring healthcare delivery. And it starts at the very local level, goes all the way up to the national level. So, for example, in my position at the Atlanta VA, we have monthly M&Ms conferences, the mortality and morbidity conferences where we sit around a table with our peers and we review complications and talk about how we improve the system. At the national level, the VA system collects all these metrics of healthcare delivery. For example, they monitor how often do the surgical departments get their first cases started on time.
Oh, they do.
They do it even more so than I see in some of the civilian places I've worked.
They want those cases to go right on time. Well, I guess that's...
So all the standard metrics that hospitals outside the VA system monitor, the VA does too, probably even more so.
Yes.
So, in fact, I would argue we're a little bit inundated with data on these quality metrics of how well we're delivering healthcare.
Yes, well...
Very robust system.
Yes, and good. I think that's a pretty good chat, Dr. Adamson, and we wish you well in Macon, and glad to welcome our community, and keep up the good work, and we'll fly the VA flag as long as we can fly one. So it's good to see you, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.